Good news, all Diane Sare is running for president in 2028. We're saved. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with our friend Diane Sare. Diane, may recall, she ran for Senate against Chuck Schumer a few years ago, and she is really a brilliant woman. She's everything from a political analyst to an activist to a politician, you name it. And now, thankfully, we finally have some sanity hidden for Washington, D.C. after all of these years of madness and imperial colonization and warmongering, all of those things. Diane Sare, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction.
So let's get started. You know what? Let's go right to the heart of the matter. And this is going to be an easy. I'll give you the easiest question in the world. You ready?
Sure.
What would you do different than Trump and Biden have done?
Well, how long do you have?
Yeah.
That's easy, but maybe we should start with Venezuela. First of all, I don't know if I'm speaking out of school or whatever you say, but Judge Napolitano said at a meeting, which I think was being recorded, so I think it's okay, that in Trump's first term, he asked President Trump, had he read the Constitution? And Trump said, no, I don't need to. That's why I have people like you. So if that's actually the case, then perhaps I don't know, maybe that's why he thinks there's anything legal at all about this recent action against the people and government and sovereignty of Venezuela. And frankly, it's an affront to the judgment of the world. It's a violation of international law, the UN Charter, and emphatically the Constitution. And I can't believe you have congressmen such as my former congressman, I moved recently, so I'm no longer in the district, of Mike Lawler, coming out and saying this was absolutely required. And of course, the president should not have told the Congress. What is that? That is so far from what's in our Constitution. I find it absolutely astounding.
Yeah. And the other part of it is this. I think it is critical. One of the things that I try to do, because in this day and age, I think those who don't want change argue for the politics of personality. We should hate Trump. We should hate Biden. The problem is Trump. Why? If we would just get another Democrat, if Kamala Harris had won, we'd all be at brunch, right? And, I bring up, well, wait a minute, under Biden, they literally machine gunned Jovenel Moise, the president of Haiti, right? This is not the first Venezuelan president that the U.S. has kidnapped. And what I bring up is the reason we need a Diane Sare in the White House is because of this history of this is what the empire does. And they just find it, they just don't have a pretty face for it now.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why many people who are better intended and who at least used to be smarter are trying so desperately to support Trump's illegal and I would say narco Rubio initiated action here is because of what you just said. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama were also completely in violation of the Constitution. Obama used to sit there with baseball cards deciding who was going to be assassinated extrajudicially with a drone, including U.S. citizens. So the idea, so people say, well, I voted for Trump because I thought he would end the forever wars. And now he's not doing that, but I can't support the Democrats. The No Kings rallies are fun. I forget the name of the lady, Leslie something or other, who's the hardcore Zionist, who's the orchestrator of that.
Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg.
Leah Greenberg, that's the one. So, people therefore out of, I think, fear and just deluded hope that anybody would uphold the Constitution. And that's really why I decided, as you know, because you're planning to join me at this meeting coming up on Saturday. I'd been planning to announce my intention to run for president Saturday. Now that meeting is going to be more like a town hall on policy, because the Venezuela action was so egregious. I felt that it was really urgent to declare now and to remind people of our Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and very importantly, the words of John Quincy Adams, who was the president and who was Secretary of State and who was also in the Congress, and who really embodied an understanding of the purpose of the formation of our republic, and would never have endorsed such an action. In fact, John Quincy Adams was, in effect, the author of what became known as the Monroe Doctrine, which has nothing to do with what Trump is doing. The whole point of the Monroe Doctrine was various states in South America were declaring their independence, and the British wouldn't recognize their independence and wanted to put it off or come up with some, they said, and the British wanted us to sign an agreement saying, well, no one else should take over these countries like Spain. And it was Quincy Adams who figured out this was a very sneaky way for the British to keep their hand in our hemisphere. And he then drafted the Monroe Doctrine explicitly against exactly the action that we just took, to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our neighbors to the south.
Yeah, and you know what we're looking at now is, I think, the ugly face that has always been there. You know, change is needed. You know, they find a way. They'll have a good-looking, smart guy like Clinton or Obama. You know, they find those when, you know, we're unhappy with whatever's there. You know, the Macrons, the Justin Trudeau's. They find these good-looking people who, you know, look good in a suit and who speak well and all that kind of stuff. But when you look behind it, they're still overthrowing Libya or something like that.
Right, exactly. I remember it so vividly. Lyndon LaRouche, who tried every time a new president was elected to give them the benefit of the doubt. And he had been very much opposed to Obama during the campaign. But when he came in, he said, look, you've got a landslide. Maybe you can move to take on Wall Street, really do. Within a couple months, LaRouche said, Obama is just an empty suit who has shoes to keep the empty suit from floating away in the atmosphere. And it's really the case. And because Bush was so, what's the word, non-verbal or whatever, maybe from his cocaine use, I don't know what Obama came in and people said, oh, he's a great speaker with zero content. And frankly, just ambitious intent. I was going to say malicious, but I think it was more ambitious because he was really a tool of the same interests who've been running our country since the assassination of President Kennedy, at least, and who tried to get their hands in there after the death of Franklin Roosevelt. And we had the whole McCarthyite witch hunts, which Donald Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, was intimately involved in. So I think we're at a turning point. Our nation has to liberate itself from this.
You know, when you become president, Diane, what would your policies be different? What would be your policies towards South America? You know, we saw this woman, Laura, we saw a lot of people haven't seen it. I think her name was Laura Richardson. You might have seen it. And she's like in charge of Southcom, Southern Command, right? This military domination over South America. And she was saying, oh, there's resources. They got all kinds of resources. She let the cat out of the bag. Your thoughts? And listen, well, we need industry, which we don't have, but let's just say for the sake of argument, we actually did have industry. We would need those resources. It's not crazy to say, oh, we'd like to access the resources from South America. And I think it would be necessary, but your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot to unwrap on this. One, the whole question of what is a resource, which depends first on the human mind. You know, petroleum wasn't a resource before we knew how to use it. In fact, it was a disaster, it would ruin your farming. It was really a waste, right? So if you don't have a policy that wants the population to develop their creative reason and be able to make scientific discoveries, you have no business running around grabbing resources because you don't even know what a resource is or what a resource will be in the future. I would say my policy, I really would look to John Quincy Adams and two of our assassinated presidents, Garfield and McKinley, both of whom wanted to develop South America, not for exploitation by the United States, but in a sense as brother nations or sister nations, republics, to create a larger bulwark against the colonial system. And John Quincy Adams was so clear, and in my statement that I wrote on the 3rd when this whole thing happened, I quoted from his comments in his, when he was Secretary of State, 1821 July 4th address to the Congress, where he spoke about the Declaration of Independence as being our republic was a gift to mankind that did away with one stroke the idea that you could establish any republic through force. That the whole question of it, if human beings are created equal, every one of us, then who gives one human being the right to rule over you unless it is through the consent of your population? That is why we are supposed to have fair elections, which is a whole other topic that we don't have. But people give their consent to a leader, and that is by an agreement of the population. So you treat, in a sense, as sacred this trust between the people and their government. So Quincy Adams said, look, we're establishing a model for everyone on the planet that human beings have the right to choose their government, to give their consent, and that the government has to uphold what it says in our Constitution, which is most emphatically the principle of the general welfare. Because if your government does not defend the welfare of you, the people, then the government is illegitimate. Why bother to have a government? You don't need a government if they're just going to abuse you. And so I think that I would start from this standpoint. One, that we have there's nothing wrong with our Constitution or a Declaration of Independence, and that the government must uphold the principles there. And by the way, remember the first one in the preamble, establish justice. We don't have justice in this country. Truth has no standing. They say truth is whatever the mainstream media or the billionaire says it is. So the idea of guilt or innocence, a crime or not a crime, I think we have to have trust in the power of reason of the people. There has to be transparency. And I think that the first thing that I would do is reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act and bankrupt Wall Street, shut down the Federal Reserve. It's unconstitutional and illegal. We just issued $74 billion, or the Federal Reserve did, in the end of 2025. This system is blowing out. We need a national bank. As Alexander Hamilton presided over, we need to credit, and we need to work with other nations in a way which respects their sovereignty, and sort of with an expectation that they're going to uphold the principles in our Constitution, that we must do that, and we should presume that other nations are, as opposed to running around bludgeoning them all under, our dictatorial decree.
Let me ask you this. So here's another question I have. Our special relationship with Great Britain. One where I have a particular animus, shall we say, but what are your thoughts about our special relationship with the British Empire, such as it is today?
I don't think we should have a special relationship with anyone. And that's what both George Washington and John Quincy, they said, no, we want to be friends. We want to have commerce, intercourse with that's what George Washington said in his farewell address, with every nation. And that we don't, he said, and George Washington said, if you become too fond of a nation, then you will discover that you've lost your own identity. You will make bad policy decisions, as we see with the case with regard to Israel, Great Britain. And I don't know if you remember, I think one of the reasons why the they set up this whole Monica Lewinsky thing to impeach Clinton. Do you remember? He said that he wanted to change that special relationship. He was leaning more toward Germany. And I think one person said, since he grew up in a kind of rough White House, white, like poor white trash or whatever his background, when he was a Rhodes Scholar, he was treated very badly by the British. I don't think he particularly liked them. So they had to make sure that he didn't get out of control.
Oh, clearly, in my opinion, the Monica Lewinsky stuff, if you look at Linda Tripp, for God's sake, just look it up. She worked for military intelligence. I mean, look it up. Anybody look up Linda Tripp, the person who was at the center of that, the person who recorded all of the conversations of Monica Lewinsky, the one who convinced Monica Lewinsky not to get rid of the blue dress. Where was she working at the time she did all of that? She was working in the Pentagon. She worked for military intelligence, but so clearly. And where's Monica Lewinsky lived ever since then? She lives in Israel. I mean, you got to be kind of deaf, dumb, and blind not to see what happened there. Anyway, well, our relationship with Israel under a Diane Sare presidency,
it would be the same as our relationship to Palestine, which should be recognized as an independent state that has existence. It should be no more and no less. We really have to treat every nation equally. And if there is legitimate reason to believe that the Prime Minister of Israel is committing genocide, as I believe there is, then there is an international way to deal with that. When the United States had better leadership, we played a critical role within the United Nations of pressuring South Africa. And the UN Security Council did various things, including refusing to seat the South African delegation in the UN General Assembly because their entire delegation was white and it didn't represent their population. So, I'd say equal, no more, no less. I'm not out to destroy a nation or batter or abuse a nation. And also, no nation has a right to batter and abuse others. And I think we do have to recognize a Palestinian state, and they have to be involved in the discussion of the reconstruction, how their government will be run, and ultimately what happens if it's a two-state or one state or however that all goes, I think is a ways down the road. But that's what I would say right now.
Well, we've recently we found out that Venezuela is pumping our oil out of our land in Venezuela, which is quite an interesting concept. But meanwhile, China, well, they're sailing their boats all over our South China Sea and all over, and they're doing things in the South China Sea right off the coast of China. And then they've got an island called Taiwan, which we recognize as part of China, but they want to do things that we have not sanctioned. So your thoughts on the U.S.'s relationship with this tiny little weak country of China that clearly we will easily dominate?
It's all nuts. Again, if our nation were committed to the good, if our nation, if we would take a step back and look at why we founded our republic in the first place, and thank God it's the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, because it gives us a great opportunity to reflect on that. And to reflect on why people said perfect the Union, because many people, many of the opponents of slavery who were founders knew we had some serious flaws that were not consistent with the principle that all men are created equal, that had to be addressed. So we were on a quest to really establishing a republican with a small r form of government. And I think we have to fight for that identity today. I have to say, I've been really disturbed by how many people I'm seeing on social media and elsewhere who think there is any justification for what was done in Venezuela. It's actually, I think, quite alarming. And it reminds me of when I spoke at William Patterson College years ago, 15 years ago, when I was running for Congress in New Jersey. I addressed they do a lot of criminal justice and law enforcement and something. So I was speaking at a class there, and I just asked, would it be legal for the United States to invade another country and change their government if we believed that their government was not good or unjust? 2/3 of the class thought that was legal.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me based on what I mean. The discussion is never in the media. The only thing they know is what they watch on television. I find that in doing radio for years in DC, I get calls, and I find that what you end up finding is that, as I say, people know the music, but they don't know the words. They have a very superficial understanding of politics. So you ask them something and they will repeat what they've seen on CNN, Fox, MSNBC. If you ask them anything substantial below that, well, tell me why that's so. Well, what do you think about that? Well, wouldn't it be, you give them some other analogy. Would it be okay for them to do this if they thought to invade us or whatever? They look at you because here's what you're supposed to think or believe. And no one in their circles ever questions that. You know what I mean? No one ever teaches them about epistemology. Hey, why do you believe that? How do we know what we know? We're what Dr. Jim Kavanaugh has called the crisis of epistemology, where Americans are taught not to ask why they believe what they believe. They're just given a script and told to recite that script repeatedly.
Right. And I think, again, we have to go back to the founding of our republic, the threads in Europe, which actually go back perhaps to Northern Africa, Eratosthenes, who first figured out the circumference of the earth in 232 BC, Socrates, this whole question of asking questions, Leibniz later, who did incredible work for Russia and China and the United States. And his question was always, why must it be so and not otherwise? That's, I think, the fundamental question of science. If you're saying, well, this is true and we say this, then we get to ask why. Why do you say it's that way and not this way? And then one should be able to prove why it is this way and not that way. And I'll add, I think one reason why people are so weak at this is we don't have a productive economy anymore. We're all consumers. So we say, well, I like pink polka dots or blue, and I think this should go this. If you actually have to make something, if you have to build a bridge, there's not multiple right answers. You cannot say, oh, well, the beam should be 15 feet long, but Mary Jane says it should be 12 and a half. And Hugo says it should be 3 inches. And everyone has a right to their opinion. Right? There would be a grave danger, actually, in allowing everyone to have a right to their own opinion in that case. And I think the fact that we no longer produce anything has had a terrible effect on us, because people think that everything has to do with your opinion and there's no such thing as truth, and you can run around and I have a right to believe whatever I want. Well, you can believe what you want, but you don't have a right to impose things that are patently and demonstrably false on other people.
Right. Is it this your ideological wish or dream, or is it empirical observations and evidence? It's, what is that? Was it Socrates and Plato who argued what reality was? But that's what we get back to. Let me ask you this. Before I do want to ask you about Ukraine, but let me throw this at you, because as you know, I've traveled to Russia recently and other places. And one of the things that struck me was getting on a train and traveling and get outside of Moscow. And I saw heavy industry. And I understood why it was that people in the EU and NATO were saying the Russians outproduce us 5-1 in this, 12-1 in this. They do more in 1 month than we can do in a year, on and on. Why? Because I'm driving along for miles and miles, old-fashioned heavy industry, these gigantic plants and factories and industry. I didn't even know what they made, but I do know they make aluminum and they have steel mills. I could tell that, and all of that. When you drive along in a country for miles and miles and you see heavy industry, you understand that this country's economy has a foundation. You can't sanction a country out of business when they have commodities and heavy industry and all of those things. Your thoughts on that? The whole concept of they say we're going to deindustrialize. Where are you going to put your money? I mean, reindustrialize, right? Trump, we're going to reindustrialize. Where are you going to put your money? AI, Wall Street, military industrial that's not heavy industry, and that's not reindustrialization, Diane.
Right. And also, I think that everyone who says things like the system's going to crash, buy gold, buy silver, you can say, oh, well, those are real. Well, yeah, but if you don't have food, if your food can't get to the grocery store, if you don't have electricity, if you don't have a means of getting water on the 27th floor of your apartment building, it really doesn't matter if you have money and if your money is cash or gold or silver. And I think, what Hamilton understood very clearly is that money has no intrinsic value. The question is credit. You use the debt, you create credit to create some actual future state, which you measure the well-being of your population in physical terms, like life expectancy or infant mortality or literacy or happiness in general. Do people think that they're happy? And that was why, by the way, we were able to clear out that massive debt, which I think was either 53 or $57 million at the time of the American Revolution. Hamilton even issued more debt in the form of credit, but he subsidized, in effect, he made the debt, he capitalized the debt to use it to drive things like building canals, building roads, developing the West, creating the conditions where the American people could become productive. And we paid off our debt. And if you read his papers, like on the subject of public credit, you will see that he calculates literally to the penny how every single thing is going to be paid. And he had various tariffs and taxes and things like that. It was the whole package. But that is the conception. It really has to be measured in the physical domain, not in any other term.
Ukraine, just going to throw that word out there, and you expound on the situation, the issue as you see it, the resolutions, on and on.
Well, first of all, if we want to end this conflict, which we were intimately involved in fomenting, we would have to recognize what President Putin keeps talking about, which is the root causes. And you cannot stop this conflict without, really, you'd have to go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the promise that James Baker III gave then Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. And Americans should consider this because we lost about 400,000 people in World War II. The Russians, or the Soviet Union at the time, lost, I've heard different figures, 27 million. I was at an event where Doug McGregor said 39 million, that he had been somewhere and they didn't want the people to know. However many millions, it was at least 1 out of 6 of their population. So if you go to Russia, every single person you meet will tell you who of their relatives died in World War II. It's very real. And who did that? The Nazis. Therefore, the idea that they would allow the peaceful reunification of Germany was a really big deal. And Americans should understand that, and why they would want to have a buffer zone of neutral nations. So you could not have an operation like Operation Barbarossa, where Nazis came storming in from the West to slaughter millions of their people. Well, that went out the window very quickly. NATO expanded, I think, 5 times. I don't know if it's 5 or 6 when Sweden and Norway or Finland, whichever are the latest ones, who joined. And then there was talk of Ukraine joining. And then we said we were going to have Ukraine join NATO. Maybe Ukraine would hold nuclear weapons. So in December of 2021, and I haven't even brought up the coup, which was the Obama administration and the British putting in a pro-Nazi regime in Ukraine in 2013, 2014. But leaving that all aside, in 2021, President Putin wrote 3 different messages to Biden, to NATO, to the British, saying, look, we have certain security concerns. We want a written treaty agreement, no nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Ukraine will not join NATO, and the ethnic cleansing against the Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, where 14,000 people had been killed by the pro-Nazi Ukrainian Azov Battalion and others between 2014 and 2022, that has to stop. And basically, everybody gave Putin the middle finger. And you've heard Jeffrey Sachs saying he tried to call Biden and say, I think you should respond. You should listen to him. Russia has legitimate concerns. Biden didn't want to. And clearly, the reason I always wondered, well, why can Biden say that Russia will invade Ukraine on X date? Well, the reason why they could give X date was because the NATO-trained Ukrainian army was massing on the other side of the Donbass, and they were planning a provocation, and I think they dropped 1,600 shells on Donetsk in one day, and Russia responded to that. So unless you're going to recognize that arc of history, you cannot solve this crisis. And this is not a matter, I heard a veteran with a lot of historical knowledge and background say we have to put more pressure on Putin. And I said, oh no, that is not the problem in this right now. And Zelensky really doesn't exist. He's just a tool of the British. And you see this is one of the better aspects, if Trump would stick to it, is the rift between these Western European warmongers and his declared intent to end this war. It's hard to tell how that's working now, but unless you're going to address that and you're going to take the legitimate security concerns of Russia into consideration, there is not a way to resolve this.
Yeah, I agree. Once again, we're talking with Diane Sare. She's a former senatorial candidate in New York, and she is now declared her intention to run for the U.S. president in 2028. And I think she's great. So we'll continue with this conversation and listen well and make a determination as to the direction that you want to go. All right, Diane. Oh, there was another big one that I wanted to ask you about. So under the Biden administration, they had all kind of people watching Twitter to make sure that we didn't tweet something that we weren't allowed to tweet or say something online that they did that the ruling elite didn't really like. And there was a tremendous amount of pushback on the censorship. There was mass censorship, clearly connected to the government, clearly an end around the First Amendment. So they could say it wasn't us, it was a private corporation. Okay, Donald Trump comes in. Oh man, that's terrible. We don't want censorship unless it comes to Israel or Zionism or something. Then shut up. Recently, we get some guy, Israeli guy, I don't know what if he was a politician or whatever, that literally says you're all gonna have to get rid of not having the First Amendment anymore. Your thoughts on censorship, the First Amendment, and these types of things?
Well, again, it gets back to what I said. You have to trust in the ability of the American people to reason. And the solution to someone saying something that is not true is to prove them wrong. Have a debate, have more speech, not less speech, have more evidence presented, not less. We had a great deal of censorship. And again, I'm going to go back here to the LaRouche case because people don't know it. And in 1986, 400 FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and Deputy Sheriff Donnie Moore raided LaRouche's offices and his home, and they shut down every single one of his publications except EIR. They shut down, very importantly, a foundation called the Fusion Energy Foundation and a magazine called Fusion, a newspaper called New Solidarity, a magazine called War on Drugs, which was not advocating for arresting 15-year-olds, but was calling for going after the Bank of England and Hong Kong, Shanghai, and, you know, that kind of war on drugs at the top. All of that was shut down. And then there was a meeting at the home of John Train with people from NBC and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the Anti-Defamation League. And they coordinated to ensure that none of whatever LaRouche said would get to the public. Everything would be distorted, and he would be called a right-wing extremist, left-wing extremist, raving anti-Semite, lunatic, blah, 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 blah. And that model has now been used ever since for anyone. And we have, because of the social media, which is online, and of course, everything online goes through whatever, the NSA and the Pentagon and this and that, they have a very easy time of eliminating speech that they don't think should happen. I think we can remember the Hunter Biden laptop affair, where 50 people who should all be fired and have their security clearances yanked, maybe they were, who all signed that letter, former intelligence people, this laptop is a fraud, it's a Russian psyop, blah, blah, blah. And then the New York Post got taken off Twitter. I can't stand the New York Post. I hate that paper, but you cannot just take them off Twitter. So we've seen this, and we see it again, as you said, on if you want to say anything about genocide going on, being perpetrated by the Israeli regime, you're not allowed to say that either. You will get banned, shadow banned. So I think this is terrible. I think the First Amendment is very urgent, but it's not merely the amendment. I think it really is this question of intent. Do we want the good? Do we want a good future? Do we want to be good? Do we want to do good? And that seems to be the main thing that you're not allowed to do in this country these days.
And I think an intent, one of the other things is this: who gets to decide what is good speech, bad speech? You know what I mean? I'm supposed to say the people that lied to me about weapons of mass destruction, the people who said babies are being thrown out of incubators. You know, I look at the government, I look at the intelligence agencies, and I find a history of deceptions, Operation Mockingbird, all kinds of things like that. And then I'm supposed to believe that they're acting in good faith to protect us from dangerous speech. The people who have done the most dangerous speech I have to believe, in order to accept that they're going to go on Twitter and say, Garland, you can't say this or that. I have to accept as a foundation that they're acting in good faith to protect me, as opposed that they're acting in bad faith to protect the machinations of empire and warmongering and Wall Street theft and all of the above.
Well, yes, what can I say? That seems to be how it is.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. There is something that a lot of people discuss, and that is fiat currency and, of course, the Federal Reserve. You mentioned the Federal Reserve. Your thoughts on it? You know, I'm not a libertarian by any stretch of the imagination. Everybody knows me. I'm an old school lefty, you know, but when I look at the Federal Reserve, and I look at Wall Street, and it's like the Federal Reserve, first of all, it's not what we're told it is. And it doesn't make things better. And it's just putting us in a bad situation because it creates debt. And technically, the definition of debt is a claim on future earnings. But of course, the other thing that said is unpayable debts will not be paid. Anyway, your thoughts on this magical Wall Street financial, I don't know what to call it, scam, the Federal Reserve.
You know, we're holding now London and Wall Street, the BIS, the Federal Reserve, et cetera, about best they know, we don't even know because of all the offshore banking and funny money, $2 quadrillion of derivatives obligations. Quadrillion. That can never be paid. Forget it. It's unpayable. So what do? And this is why I'm saying Glass-Steagall and why I'm saying bankruptcy reorganization, because you want to do, in effect, what Franklin Roosevelt did during the bank holiday, where he had local people go into every single bank and go through the books and sort out what was legitimate, what was illegitimate, write off a bunch of stuff and reschedule a bunch of other debt because it was tied to an important company that was producing something or someone's mortgage or whatever. You wanted to save that. And maybe they just needed a little more time or they needed a little more favorable rate. And he had that all done in 4 days and then reopened the banks. We now have the Federal Reserve, which has become the depository for all of this garbage that it's swallowed up, helping to keep this multi-quadrillion dollar bubble afloat. So the Federal Reserve needs to be kind of put through bankruptcy. Absolutely, an audit is the first step. And then it needs to be abolished because it's unconstitutional. It's privately run. And where I differ from the libertarians is I believe there must be a national bank. And Alexander Hamilton wrote 2 entire papers on the national bank, first on the national bank. And then when there was a hot debate over it, and Andrew Jackson told a bunch of lies about it and got rid of it and caused a terrible economic collapse, Hamilton had written another paper called The Constitutionality of the National Bank, making the point that if the government is supposed to do all these things, establish justice and provide for the common defense and domestic tranquility and the general welfare, you have to be able to control credit. You have to be able to direct credit. And therefore, you need a national bank, which is, in effect, under the oversight of the Congress, our elected people. You need a Secretary of the Treasury. You need, someone who is running the national bank. And I have a colleague, Paul Gallagher, who's written quite a bit about this, how his proposal for how it would be run, even draft legislation, which I think is very good. But it's people should look at. I don't know how the Congress would ultimately deal with it. Unfortunately, we have a Congress which I think is probably not qualified or able to read the Federalist Papers. So I'm not sure how they will do with this. But we really need a national bank, and we need the dollar to be pegged to gold or some hard basket of commodities and fixed exchange rates, because that's the other piece. When Nixon decoupled the dollar from the gold reserve system, suddenly, instead of money changing hands because it was tied to physical production, you could gamble, like George Soros destroyed the currency of Malaysia in a fell swoop at one point. You could just gamble on other people's currencies. And if you had enough money, then you could reap massive destruction, cause massive hyperinflation, and you could do things like what the International Monetary Fund and World Bank did to countries south of our border, which is they said, oh yeah, we'll give you a loan, but you're not allowed to use it for motorized vehicles. You're not allowed to use electricity. And by the way, if we give you this loan, you got to devalue your currency. So your currency is 10 to the dollar now. Well, it's going to be 50 to the dollar. So when you repay us, you're going to owe us 5 times what you borrowed, never mind the interest. And if you fail to pay us, we're going to steal your infrastructure. And that's what floating exchange rates allowed. And it also allowed a system where now the stock market is totally divorced from reality. The higher it goes, the worse our economy is. And it is almost a mirror image, because every nickel that goes into that bubble is money that is literally being sucked out of investment in something physical in the real world, whether it's infrastructure or manufacturing or anything like that.
Okay, let me ask you this: $1 trillion for the defense war medical budget, right? 900 bases. Your thoughts?
I mean, clearly it's absurd. You could say the Chinese are getting near our military bases. Right? I think we could shut down nearly all of them without any detrimental effect. Again, I think Doug McGregor was saying he thinks we need 100 of them or 50 of them or something. I'm not sure. I mean, if we wouldn't act like such jerks, we probably wouldn't even need to feel that we were that threatened by other nations. So this is a huge expenditure. And I'm sure you saw in the national security strategy, as did I, that they're proposing that in South America, the whole purpose of our diplomatic facilities is to look for opportunities for private companies to take over the raw materials and industry in these countries. It's just all wrong. It shows no understanding of the United States, no understanding of what it means to be a human being as opposed to a donkey. And, you don't do things through force. And that reminds me, I want to bring up something else. This saying, peace through strength, is a complete fraud. There is no such thing, because it means peace through force. And you never get peace that way. You get peace. Peace is active. It is not passive. It is a shared mission. It is a common objective. And John Quincy Adams was so clear. And I would ask everyone listening to think, if you have to use force to impose democracy, then is it democracy? Are you free if someone is forcing you to do something? Obviously not. So peace through strength is just complete lunacy, and I wish people would stop saying it doesn't exist.
Well, I like this better. Strength through peace. Let's move the words around. There's only one way. There's only one way to have peace in your life, and that is to be peaceful. They never think about that, Diane. I think that was it. Let me ask you this: domestically speaking, what are your thoughts on all the homelessness? And, I used to like to go to California. I go to Northern California, Southern. I have friends there. Oh, I had a good old time. My cousin just went a couple of weeks ago. He went to San Diego. I was like, that. He was like, yeah, it ain't what it used to be when we used to go back in the day. I'm like, oh my God, there's homelessness everywhere. There's graffiti all over the place. It's gone to crap. That's so many places. You go to the cities that used to be the jewels of the empire. I hate to say that. And you look in the cities, New York, there's graffitis everywhere, tents, people staying on the streets. You just see misery. Your thoughts on the homelessness in that situation in America, and could it be addressed? Would you address it, etc.?
It must be addressed. New York State, where I live, has 3 of the top 10 cities for child poverty in the United States. Syracuse, New York, which was one of these jewels, it was the center of the Erie Canal. It was a massive hub of manufacturing. 46% of the children there live below the poverty line. So there's a number of factors. One is we have to get back to decent employment. We have to suck the speculation out of the real estate market. The price of housing is completely out of control, rent and housing. And then you have things like Madison Square Garden and the Yankee Stadium that pay 0 property taxes. So, that would have to be addressed. But we also have a serious mental health problem. If you take the number of inpatient psychiatric beds in the United States, say in 1960, and look at what you have today, we reduced that by 90%. Now, clearly there was some progress with medication, that a lot of people with various kinds of medication can now live on their own or live in a group home. And there were abuse issues when someone is mentally ill and they're in a controlled environment. That's a legitimate concern, but we got rid of 90% of our inpatient hospital beds. And I used to joke, we dumped everyone out and they all went to Washington and became part of the institutions down there. But mental illness is very much stigmatized. And because we don't produce and because we have no national mission, we don't look for how we can help people to become productive citizens. We go with this force thing, which is we have to punish them. And we see this, by the way, in our prison systems. I read a couple of years ago this book called Life and Death in Rikers Island by Dr. I forget his name, but he was the head of the medical commission for the prisons. And he described a number of cases where people had died. One was an inmate who was mentally ill and was told that he was going to be put in solitary confinement, which he found unbearable. So he swallowed an industrial strength soap capsule. And this caused excruciating pain and vomiting. And the corrections officers gathered outside his cell and laughed and scorned and said, now you're suffering. Now you deserve it. You wouldn't obey us. You didn't do it. And the man died. That is the attitude. It's immoral, it's horrible, and it also doesn't work, especially if you're dealing, as in our prison population, with a large percentage of people who have mental illness, whom you are not caring for. So what I think our nation needs, let me just say, is 1, the Bering Strait Tunnel, which I think should be launched immediately, is going to require a massive amount of concrete and steel and a skilled workforce. And it would be absurd to build the Bering Strait Tunnel if we didn't build 43,000 miles of high-speed rail in the United States. and we're going to need to build new cities. We're going to need a massive skilled workforce. So all these people that we consider expendable right now, all the people who don't have to have vocational education in prison and all that, all of our veterans who also get thrown on the scrap heap, we are going to need these people. We're going to need them to become functional, and our whole attitude is going to change. And that is how we actually are going to address the homeless situation. Because once you realize that you don't have any useless people and you don't have any useless leaders in your society, then you view everything differently.
Well, thank you very much, Diane. Tell everyone where they can find you online, where they can follow you. Do you have your website up yet for your run?
My website will not be up until this Saturday, December 10th. And there is a meeting. You can look. I am on Facebook. I'm on X. I'm on TikTok. You can look there because I've posted a link. If you want to join the Saturday meeting via Zoom, you can sign up and register. And if you do that, you'll be on my mailing list. And starting this Saturday, there will be an official website. And I have a very exciting campaign launch video that will be coming out that day as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing you on Saturday and hanging out. You and all of our dear friends who are working so hard to make change. Diane Sare, everyone, follow her online, support her. You can listen to her. I mean, isn't it nice to hear sanity and reason in politics, to hear rationality as opposed to the madness that you turn on the TV and we're hearing from Lindsey Graham and crazy people? And then the Democrats come up and they write something, supposedly they're angry at Trump, and they attack him from the right. Yes, well, he does cozy up to dictators, but he shouldn't kidnap this one. You know, and I'm like, if you read what they said, oh, yes, we need answers. That's what the Democrats wrote. They need a statement. They need answers. Well, the guy said that we went in and kidnapped the guy. I don't need any more answers. You want answers? Read the Constitution. Your answers are there. You're not allowed to do that if you're president. You know, how about that? But, you know, we've got this one party trying to pretend that it's two thing going on, Diane. Yes. So, yes. Thank you very much. And everybody, Diane will be back, of course, you know, on this. She will be back on this channel occasionally, every couple of weeks or so. We'll bring her back and we'll get an update, find out what's going on, and we'll share her information and make sure you follow her. And the most important thing that everybody watching or who watches this video, the most important thing you can do is share it on all your social media platforms. We're out.